Today, April 22nd, we observe Earth Day. Earth Day came about because recognition was growing of the harm that we humans are causing to the natural systems of our home, this planet Earth. All of our sustenance comes from the earth, from the food we eat, to the water we drink, the air we breathe, the clothing we wear, and the houses in which we live. If we do not care for the well-being of the earth, then the source of everything we need to live is at risk. Earth Day asks the question, how can we enlarge our concerns, our love and care, to care not only for human well-being, but also to care for creation? I'd like to share a story about how short-sighted we humans can be. My father grew up on a sheep ranch in Montana, and he told me a story of an encounter with a wolf when he was a child. He and his brother were walking across a field on their way to school when they encountered the wolf. They were both terrified, but they were able to take refuge in an outbuilding until the wolf went on its way. He was happy when the wolves were exterminated by the 1920s. So then he was outraged when wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park in the 1990s. His opinion of wolves was that they were, in his words, the most useless things that ever was. He went on, "We spent 100 years getting rid of the damn things, and now they're bringing them back." The sad truth is, after the wolves were exterminated in the 1920s, elk multiplied in the park, and their large numbers caused considerable damage to the Yellowstone ecosystem. Reintroduction of the wolves 70 years later enabled a greater diversity of wildlife to flourish in the park, restoring a balance that had been disrupted. I attribute the destructive presence of humans to attitudes such as that of my father. The desire to take control of the living processes of Earth, ridding ourselves of anything that seems destructive, or even what is merely inconvenient or uncomfortable. The observance of Earth Day is a hopeful sign of growing awareness that the need to be in control has destructive consequences. Attitudes are changing. Still, there is inadequate attention to threats, such as those posed by climate change. And there is special need to attend, as Pope Francis has reminded us in his encyclical, Laudato Si', that the poorest people pay a disproportionate cost for the damage that is occurring. The concerns that I've just mentioned, and that seem to be the dominant focus of Earth Day, are about survival. How do we address the threats to the living systems of Earth and also maintain our present way of life? I have a deeper concern that I would like to explore with you by considering the idea of revelation. The word revelation refers to some sort of supernatural disclosure relating to human existence or the world. I grew up as a Catholic, and I learned the church teaching that divine revelation is contained in Scripture and tradition. Scripture refers to the written texts of the Bible, and tradition refers to the interpretation of these texts over the course of centuries. In recent years, I've come to appreciate that the earth herself is also a source of divine revelation. Our direct experience of the beauty and goodness of creation reveals something directly to our sensibility about the goodness of God. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote of Revelation as being contained in two books, the book of creation and the written books of the Bible. The impoverishment of earth threatens to impoverish our understanding of God. The traditional teaching of the church has developed mostly as an intellectual tradition, primarily as an application of reason. Experiencing the direct revelation of earth is more of a mystical tradition, appealing to our hearts more than to our heads. Thomas Merton is an exemplar of the mystical tradition. In one of his writings, he describes the activity of God as a kind of game, or possibly a dance. He wrote, "We do not have to go very far to catch echoes of that game and of that dancing. When we are alone on a starlit night, when by chance we see the migrating birds in autumn descending on a grove of junipers to rest and eat, when we see children in a moment when they are really children, when we know love in our own hearts, or when, like the Japanese poet Basho, we hear an old frog land in a quiet pond with a solitary splash. At such times, the awakening, the turning inside out of all values, the newness, the emptiness, and the purity of vision that make themselves evident, provide a glimpse of the cosmic dance." For many years now, Elaine and Leslie and I have walked to church through Interlaken Park. We have observed how the park changes through the seasons. We listen to the songs of the birds, and we've been surprised by a sudden appearance, such as a mob of crows harassing a hawk or owl. All of these experiences help us to be aware of the presence and love of God as we come for our weekly celebration in this community. I love Interlaken Park, even though the forest there is suffering greatly from invasive weeds that overpower the native plants and create difficulties for birds and other wildlife. The introduction of non-native plants is another example of a short-sighted action. I have participated in work parties that help restore the native forest. And every year I transplant native red cedar and Douglas fir seedlings that sprout in our yard. I transplant these into the park. I've planted more than 60 trees in the last 15 or 20 years. What I want to say is that just understanding our difficulties in our heads is not enough to bring about the changes needed if we are to respond adequately to the present situation. After all, scientists have been warning us for decades about the threat of global warming. But even with understanding, there has been little effective response. We even observe significant efforts to deny the situation because an effective response will require that we change our way of life. Effective change will only come about if we engage with our hearts as well as our heads. We need to fall in love with the earth. After all, if you have ever fallen in love with another person, if you have ever fallen in love with Jesus, you know it has changed your life. Wholehearted prayer for creation, the changes that are needed in our way of life, will come about when we are able to respond to the love of God that is evident in the beauty and goodness of creation. My life has changed because of the time I have spent paying attention in the natural world, because of my experience of the love of God in creation, and because I have learned about what is needed for the flourishing of both the human community and the living communities in which we are enmeshed. What is needed above all is a change in our